Hi everybody, here I am. Hi Fazona, nice to see you. Aisha, hi. Hi Paul. Regular as ever, my friend. Nice to see you. Pushali, a very good morning to you. Hi Rupa, I'm very well, thank you. It's a very hot day here today in Melbourne, Australia. Meenakshi, nice to see you. Who have we got in the chat? We're live on YouTube today, so hello to all of my friends on YouTube. Very, very nice to have you here along for one of our free E2 classes. Remember, we're dealing with speaking today. Hi, Earl. All right. What time will this start? This will start in about a minute. Trisha. Well, actually, it's kind of started now, actually, I guess, if you count me saying hello. All righty. Let's kick off. Hi, Annie. It's too hot in Sydney as well, Rupa. Here, yeah, it's really, really, really hot here today. Well, not as hot as it's been. It's about 38 degrees, but it's kind of dry, yeah. All righty, everybody. Yes, Teacher Craig here. Oh, that you're on YouTube. Nice to see you. No video yet, Catherine. I'm just about to start it. I'm just starting the recording. And there is me. Hello, everybody. Oh, it's just a little bit gloomy, isn't it? What's going on with my camera? Hello, Vivian. Nice to see you. All righty, my friends. So everybody is here. We've got lots of people joining us on YouTube today. And of course, some of you are joining with your free accounts and stuff like that. First time to use on a phone, Paul. Yeah, let me know how it works, actually. Sometimes some things work really well on a phone and some don't, yeah? Nice to see you, Aisha. Very, very nice to see you as well. Yeah, I've got the blinds a little bit closed because it's kind of hot out there. All right, I'll just shut the chat for now. Hello, everybody there in YouTube land. Really, really lovely to have you for one of E2's wonderful free offerings. Hola, Anna. Okay, couple of announcements, all right, before we really get into thinking about our OET speaking test, yeah? So it's really, really nice to have our YouTube friends here today. I just want to say a couple of things to all of you in general, and those of you who are joining through Zoom, that's great to have you. But my friends on YouTube, unfortunately, because of the nature of the free classes and the sheer numbers that join us, I won't have much of a chance to, or any chance really, to respond to your queries and questions, as good as they will be and useful and interesting as they will be on the YouTube chat, okay? So I don't want you to feel like I'm being impolite, okay? It's just that it's really, really hard to do, okay? For all of you, including those of you who are joining us on YouTube and the other folks here who have joined just for a free class, and also my regulars, I wanted to start by just talking about a couple of things, all right? So this is one of the regular free classes. I'm just going to share my slides now, okay, guys? And I just want to start, if you don't mind, my friends, by just doing a little bit of advertising. Let me full screen it. So Jay has asked me to do this, but it's very, very good sense to do it anyway. So for all of us here on YouTube, all of us here in our ordinary classes, those of you joining live today, I just wanted to point out that, give you a little reminder that if you're a member, for free members, if you upgrade your E2 account to another package above free membership, you can get all of these wonderful things. Of course, you can get, if you're an OET student, you can get twice daily live classes with myself, Craig. My name is Craig. And of course, many of you are very familiar with my excellent buddy, Jay. Okay, so Jay does morning classes that are timed for the Northern Hemisphere and for the UK. And I do these daily afternoon classes, which are timed for, I guess, Australian or Southern Hemisphere timed. But remember, you can come to as many as you want to, right? Everybody is welcome. So we get live classes, which are basically pretty awesome, to be honest. I think they're very useful and I enjoy them tremendously, and so does Jay. The other thing you'll get, which is very, very powerful for speaking and writing in particular, are one-to-one tutorials, face-to-face tutorials with your own teacher, one of our awesome E2 expert teachers, OET expert teachers, who will discuss your writing or your speaking in particular, or if you need practice, your listening and your reading. Okay, highly, highly recommended. I'm going to talk about them again a little bit later, particularly for speaking and writing, but any of the skills you can deal with. And it's really, really nice to get, of course, a little bit of face-to-face, one-to-one attention. Okay. And E2 is lucky to have several really, really excellent teachers, very skilled and knowledgeable in the ways of OET, not just myself and Jay. Okay. Of course, the other thing you can get is the recorded classes. So all of these live classes that Jay and myself do in relation to OET within a day or two. I know some of you will say it's probably longer sometimes, but usually within 24 hours, they are uploaded to the E2 website and to the learning management system, as we might call it, so that you can watch them at your leisure, watch them again, watch one part several times if you think that one piece of information is particularly relevant. You have a self-study course, which is excellent, which is just guided, not only practice, but guided activities relating to smaller points of improvement, plenty of practice tests. And let me make a quick announcement to subscribers today. Jay has informed me that 2 new reading tests, part A, B, and C, 2 new reading A's, 2 new reading B's, and 2 new reading C's went up onto the E2 website today. Okay, he texted me earlier today, SMS'd me earlier today to ask me to tell you. So that's very good news, and that adds to our pile of practice we've got. Okay, just in time for the test, yeah? So amongst the self-study, there is things like practice tests and also smaller activities that can help you improve in general. There's also some guidance on grammar and other things like that, which is always useful to think about. The other thing you get, which is sometimes in relation to the one-to-one tutorials, of course, is feedback. And many of you who have already subscribed, but those of you who are free subscribers may not know this, but you can submit a piece of writing into an assessment system, and it will be looked at by one of our E2 OET experts, and they will give you some feedback and, in a sense, give you an idea of how strong your writing is, or any areas you might need to improve in relation to those quite complex OET scoring criteria. Okay, so very, very useful again. And you see, particularly for writing here. Okay, all right, and that's really it. All right, so if you haven't already got an upgraded subscription to E2, I really, really recommend it. I know some of you are probably already doing the test on Saturday, but those of you who are not and feel like you need more preparation, E2 is basically pretty awesome, to be honest. If you want to upgrade, it's free today, Jay has said to me, and also it's relatively simple. You just log in and to your E2 account, and inside your dashboard, we call it, the thing that you see when you log in, you will just click the button that says upgrade, okay? And then you can select the different subscription packages that E2 offers, all right? I think they've all got names of metals, actually, I think from bronze right up to platinum, which of course is the most valuable metal, so gives you more, right? Okay, so there's Craig's little piece of advertising, all right? Okay, so today we're going to be looking at OET Speaking, which is a really, really interesting but quite a challenging test, I know, for many of you. Okay, I'm just going to quickly check the chat to make sure that everybody is feeling good. Okay. Oh, thanks, Irene. That's very kind. Irene has just given a personal recommendation for E2 teachers. E2 teachers are awesome. They are very skilled and knowledgeable, but perhaps just as importantly, they are kind and sensitive and willing to listen to you as well. All right. It's a big part of being a teacher is emotional support as much as anything, right? So I know my colleagues are good. Yeah. Yeah, good. So let me summarize. Please subscribe. Think about upgrading if you need more help. I really, really recommend it. And also, of course, 2 new sets of reading tests have gone up. Complete reading tests have gone up today. So that's awesome news. What else did I want to say? I think there's a couple of other interesting things. One more thing, an announcement. Remember, some of you know this already, but those of you out there in free E2 land, shall we call it, and YouTube land, my excellent friends, tomorrow I am doing an extra live class, okay? Tomorrow, please check the time inside YouTube in the link, or also in the E2 calendar if you already have a subscription. So tomorrow, after my normal live class, tomorrow I'll be doing 2. Tomorrow I'll do writing like I always do on a Thursday, but after that, I will be doing an extra class on listening part C, okay? just because it's exam week and everybody's feeling a bit anxious and that. So Jay and I have thought that it was a good idea to do that. That will also be live streaming to YouTube. So YouTubers, you don't miss out, all right? As I said, wonderful to have you here, okay? All righty. Thank you, my friends. So let's shut the chat and now let's get into it. As I said, my YouTube buddies, I know you've probably got questions and things, but unfortunately, the nature of multiple screens and platforms means that I can't give you the attention I might normally do. I would suggest that's perhaps another reason to subscribe. So you can be in the chat in Zoom with us contributing and having some of your excellent questions answered. All right. I think that's all I wanted to do. A little bit of advertising, not necessarily a natural stance for me, but let's go. All right, OET Speaking. Oh, sorry, there's another advertisement, excuse me. Those of you who are subscribed and have a package that allows you to get one-to-one tutorials, can I just give you a piece of friendly, teacherly advice? We do a lot of interesting things here, and Jay and I can give you a great deal of insight into the speaking test. And we can do a little bit of language practice and talk about the criterion, the way you're scored and things. But there is absolutely no replacement for doing some speaking practice live on Zoom, face-to-face with an expert teacher who will give you direct, immediate feedback on your performance, okay? So if you haven't done it and you've got enough time before the exam on Saturday, or you're doing the test later in the year, in the next few months, please, please, please do one of these. I'm not telling you to do this because it's about money for E2 or myself. I'm telling you because in 20 years of teaching, I know that this is one of the best ways to quickly and quite rapidly improve your performance in a test, okay? Particularly a speaking test, all right? Every person is different. You may have pronunciation difficulties. You may have a slight misunderstanding on the nature of the task, okay? A person sitting in front of you, like myself or one of my awesome E2 colleagues, is going to be able to get to that point, that uniqueness in you, very, very quickly, okay? So really, really, can I just implore you to do that if you haven't done it, okay? No matter how confident you feel, all right? It's a really, really useful thing to do, okay? Last advertising, last piece of imploring. Let's have a look at the task. So we always start at the beginning, right? But let's talk about the speaking test in general, right? It's 20 minutes in total, and you'll see approximately, and you'll see that that's what adds up here. So what's in the speaking test? Well, the speaking test always begins with a warm-up conversation, and it's around about 5 minutes, okay? So in each of these interviews, the interlocutor, the first thing they will do is they will actually press record on a recording device, okay? So don't be surprised if they do that. Very important to know what to expect, right? The whole thing is recorded. So they will press record and then they will check your identity and of course your profession. Why will they check your profession? I hope you remember each of you, depending on what your specialization is, as a nurse, a doctor, physiotherapist, etc., has a card that is tailored to your profession only, okay? So if you walk into your speaking test and they say, are you a doctor? And you say, no, I'm a physiotherapist. They're gonna go, oh, I need to have a physiotherapist card, okay? So they check your identity and your profession. A little tip there, when you register for the test, you will give some identification to help you register. When you go to the test on the test day, take the same identification, whether it's your national identity card or a passport or whatever. Take the same photo identification to the test that you used to register for the test originally, just so that there's no confusion about your identity, okay? That's a recommendation from OET, actually, all right? Then there'll be a short warm-up conversation between you and what we call the interlocutor, the person you are speaking with, okay? And it is a warm-up conversation and it's kind of scripted. They will ask you the same set of questions each. They will talk about your profession, your professional ambitions. Where do you want to, are you doing the OET to study further or to travel, et cetera, okay, or to register in another country. So they have that, and that is a very, very, very good opportunity for you to try to get comfortable with that person and create a little bit of what we call rapport, friendly, relaxed relationships, okay? It's also a good opportunity to get used to the sound of their voice, perhaps ask their name. Their name could be very critical later as something you might use when you begin to do the speaking test, okay? Very, very natural move to say, what's your name? Oh, my name is Craig. Can I call you Craig in the role play? They'll say yes or no, etc. Okay. This part is not assessed. So even though you will feel nervous, I guess, or some of you will feel nervous, a little bit of nerves is normal and natural. Okay. Don't get too kind of upset. All right. So it's not assessed. It's a really, really nice time for you just to relax and move in to the situation and take some deep breaths and feel good. Yeah. All right. And then you begin your first role play. And this is really what we'll discuss today, the two role plays themselves. At the end of this 5 minutes, the interlocutor will give you your role play card. So you don't have your card here. You don't know what the scenario is, etc. You get it here. Okay. You'll receive your card with the information about the role play related to your profession. Again, let's just make that nice and clear. Then you have 2 to 3 minutes to prepare. We'll call it preparation time before you're asked to start the role play. And the role play takes about 5 minutes. So let's just talk about this though. The timing. Many of you ask a very, very good question. You say, how will I know when 5 minutes is up? How will I know when my 2 to 3 minutes of planning is up? My advice to you, you don't have to worry about the time at all. The interlocutor controls everything. They control the beginning, the warm-up 5 minutes, the end of that 5 minutes, the beginning of your 2 to 3 minutes, the end of that time, the beginning of the role play, the end of the role play. Okay. So every important moment is controlled by the interlocutor. You have no say. So even if you think you know how long the talk has been going, it is only the interlocutor that can say, please begin, please end. Okay. My feeling is, don't think about it. Think about your task. Concentrate on your talk. Concentrate on feeling calm, relaxed, and doing as well as you possibly can. Okay. So they control the entire event. All right. So you have 2 to 3 minutes, and we're going to dwell on this a little bit in a minute and think about what we can do in that time to make the role play a little easier and be better prepared for it. Okay. At the end of that time, they say, can you please begin the role play now? And that is pretty much verbatim what they say. Okay. And that is your moment, like a running race, to go ready, set, go. All right, let's go. So when they say, can you begin, don't go and nervously giggle. Immediately say, you know the scenario, you know what it is. Welcome, Mr. Craig. Don't say Mr. Craig, say my second name, which is Wattam. Okay. Please sit down. What brings you in today? All right. So I really, really encourage you to take control of the role play from the very first second. Okay. It's your show, right? Nobody else is being assessed. The interlocutors' language and movements are not being assessed, only you. Okay. So as soon as they ask you to start, please start. Okay. At the end of that 5 minutes, and they will time it, they will say that's the end of the role play. And at that moment, you can just stop. Okay. You don't have to think, oh my goodness, I didn't finish. Oh, well, you might finish your sentence perhaps, as long as it's not a very long sentence. Okay. And that's because actually the process is repeated. Yeah. And so there are 2 role plays, very, very good practice from the perspective of testing. Nobody wants to be assessed on one performance. Okay. Not me, not you, not anybody. It runs the serious risk of being unfair. Okay. So you are repeated. It is a different card. It is still for your profession, but the scenario is different. All right. And there is always the potential that one scenario, for whatever reason, you find more challenging than another. The flip side of that, of course, is that you find the second scenario slightly easier or vice versa. Okay. So you have 2 performances that are assessed independently by 2 raters. Okay. Just remind you, the person you're speaking to here, the interlocutor, does not rate your speaking at all, ever. Okay. And in many cases, they're not a trained rater. Sometimes maybe. Okay. But they're not there to rate you. And if they are the interlocutor and they happen to also be a trained rater as a different job, if you like, they would never be allowed to assess your speaking. Okay. It has to be somebody that we would call independent, who wasn't there. And they listen to the audio recording that is taken of this whole event. Okay. So that's our quick overview, relatively quick overview of what to expect. All right. Do some due diligence, my friends, in the world. Take some time to go to the OET website or to the blog, which has a lot of good information, and make sure you understand what's going to happen to you on test day. Okay. It's very important. All right. Let me just check the chat. Okay. Yeah, Farzona, I think that's right. If you're taking the test in Australia, the passport is really the most powerful type of, shall we say, identification, all right? In most countries it is, okay? But occasionally there are countries that have a national identification card or something like that. But as I said, use the same identification you used to register for the test online originally, okay? Mapesa's got a question. If the interlocutor asks to stop for the first time and you did finish the task, could you continue? Mapesa, you are required, or sorry, it's in your benefit to speak for 5 minutes, okay? So if you feel like that you've finished the task in less than 5 minutes, you really have to continue, okay? It would be quite a dangerous precedent. That's really, you think about this, you are providing a language sample, okay? So there's a sense on analogy with, say, a biological sample where you haven't given enough for them to be able to understand what it is you can do, okay? So that if you think there's more to be said than in the 5 minutes, that doesn't matter. The 5 minutes is the threshold for that first task, okay? Don't worry about that. You're not rated on whether or not you completed all of the bullet points on the task, okay? Again, your sample is evaluated on the language you produced in that 5 minutes, okay? So it's a very, very good question, my friend, okay? Hi, Hamza. Rupa, what if we don't know about the topic? Can we ask the interlocutor if yes, and then when? Very good question, Rupa. Okay, you have to have a conversation for 5 minutes, Rupa. Very, very nice question. Asking questions, we're going to talk about this in a minute. In this 2 to 3 minutes, when you are reading your role play and trying to prepare, you can ask any question to the interlocutor. All right, it might be the pronunciation of a strange word. Okay. But remember, if you don't know anything about the topic, all of the information at the technical level that you will really need is on the card, okay? This is not a test of medical knowledge, all right? So if you look at it and it's about a clinical condition you have really not much experience of, there is going to be some help there, all right? OET expects that that is enough and they don't expect you to add more, okay? So you can ask questions in your preparation time, and I encourage you to do that, and we'll talk about this again towards the end. But also, if you see a condition, one that came up once was ADHD. It's a fairly unique sort of psychological and also physical problem, I guess. Not all of us are experts in this, but they're not testing you on your knowledge of ADHD. They're giving you enough basic information in the card to have a conversation with the interlocutor in that scenario, okay? So let me make that clear. This is not a test of your knowledge of the condition. That should be the least of your concerns. I know that you're feeling anxious, yeah? But they're not gonna choose a very, very rare medical condition and go, well, gee, nobody knows anything about this, so nobody's gonna get an A or a B, right? Not at all. They're testing your conversational and communicative skills, okay? So if you don't know anything about it, don't worry about it. Read the card carefully, look at the content they've given you. Their assumption is that's more than enough and you're allowed to use it, okay? So that's the answer to that question. It's a lovely question, Rip, a really good question. I know you're not expected to finish the bullet points, right? Yeah, I agree. I know it's just given a nice piece of advice. As many native speakers as you can find, or fellow English speakers, doesn't have to be native, excuse me, that's a terrible slip of my tongue, but colleagues, practice these scenarios, just practice talking through them. You are not assessed on finishing the bullet points, okay? You are assessed on the language you produce in that 5 minutes. Some of the guidance in the bullet points is very, very useful, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, okay? All right. No kemas. When they ask you to stop, just stop. Okay. In fact, they will tell you to stop again if you don't stop. Oh, thanks, Hamza. Yeah, I have moved house. All right, so that's the basics. Now let's look at some details together, yeah? All right, so I just want to make a little point to all of you here, you in YouTube, you guys here in my Zoom class, all right? OET has designed a test task to simulate the real world, okay? It's a simulation, a copy, yes? And this is a very, very significant point, all right? You as practicing medical professionals in these 12 different professions are not going into the OET test going, gee, what is this mysterious thing that they are testing me on? It's quite the opposite. OET has gone to the medical world, to the various practitioners and the various practicing fields, if you like, and said, what happens here when one of these professionals meets with a patient? Okay, what kinds of things need to happen here? All right. So what I want you to think about is your training and your experience. Okay. It's very common as an OET teacher. It's a tongue twister, isn't it? OET teacher. To be asked questions like, Craig, how do I start a consultation? Okay. Now, when you think about it, at first that seems like a good question because you know you are tested on that. But really, if you just pause for a second, it's a crazy question because most of you have started numerous consultations in your professional experience or been trained to do it and done simulations in your training, okay? So my first and most, if you like, archetypal piece of advice is think about the language, the English in this case, obviously, and your experience will be greater or less in that environment. Think about the language you typically use, okay? What I don't recommend you do is look at big lists of ways to say hello and then start to practice a whole bunch that you never use, because each of you, I'm pointing now because I know it's true, each of you will have your own kind of typical, shall we say, favorite way to greet a person, okay? And this is what you're being tested on. You're being tested on your capacity to not overthink it and, gee, how does OET want me to greet my patient? No, it's automatic. It's like, welcome, Mrs. Smith, please sit down. What brings you here today? You can see that that's my normal way of doing it. I'm not a doctor or a nurse, right? Or a physiotherapist or a dentist or anything. But I would fall back into my usual ways of doing it, okay? The other thing I want to talk about is that many of you, or all of you actually, are trained in professional patient communication, okay? So many of the lessons that you have had in your training and then of course subsequently in your clinical experience are what you need to bring to this task, okay? And I put this quote here from Longnecker, who is an actual trainer of medical professionals in communication. And here's the claim, and it's very true. The three main goals of current real professional patient communication are creating a good interpersonal relationship. One of the major things that OET is asking you to do as well. Facilitating exchange of information, okay? And this should start to remind you of the OET criteria, the rating criteria. Information gathering, information giving, okay? And including patients in decision making, okay? Patient's perspective, patient's cues, empathy, all of these things are echoes of what OET has created their criteria on, okay? So OET's speaking task is designed to simulate the real world, okay? All of you exist as medical professionals in the real world. Bring your training and experience to the OET task. Understand the task with gentlemen like me, and then bring your natural capacity to perform that task to it, okay? Not the other way around. Don't think OET is doing something mysterious and going, gee, what do OET want? No, they want to see what you can do, what you already do in many cases, okay? So that's my speech, okay? And I'm really going to push that, yeah? All right, I'm just going to quickly turn my light on, actually, because it's getting dark. Feels like it's going to rain here, actually, weirdly enough, even though it's 38 degrees. Let's talk about scoring quickly before we get into some more detail, okay? So how are you scored? Well, there's two sets of criteria, and I guess this is pretty well known now that the test changed in terms of criteria, not task, okay? But what hasn't changed are the linguistic criteria, and this is, again, primarily a language test, so it's unsurprising that there are. So your performance in each of the two role plays is scored against 4 linguistic criteria. They look a little bit complex and fancy, but when you think about what they are, they're very obvious. Intelligibility, and we'll talk about these in a minute. Intelligibility is scored out of 6, okay, on a range of 1 to 6. Fluency is similarly scored on a range of 1 to 6. Appropriateness, using the right type of language for the situation you are in, is scored again out of 6. And then finally, most obviously, the one that most people focus on, perhaps mistakenly, resources of grammar and expression, vocabulary and grammar, really, also scored out of 6. So you'll get a raw score of 24, okay, for linguistic criteria. Let's have a little look at each of these quickly so you know what we mean, yeah? So intelligibility is basically about clarity, how easy it is to understand you, okay? So unsurprisingly, it's going to refer to pronunciation, intonation, stress, rhythm, and to the least extent, accent, okay? A lot of people think, well, gee, accent's going to affect a lot of things, but it doesn't. I have an accent. I'm a native English speaker, but I don't know, most of you on YouTube probably can't tell, but I'm not an Australian. I'm a New Zealander, okay? I was at the beach today having a swim for my lunch, which is what I often do to relax before I work on my slides and things. And I was speaking to a lovely Australian man who was walking his dog. And I said, oh, I'm from New Zealand. And he said, yes, I know. Why did he know? Because of the sound of my voice. So I have an accent, you have an accent, everybody has an accent, okay? Now, to a greater or lesser extent, your accent might influence these things. And of course, your mother tongue, as we might call it, your first language, okay? But don't overplay your accent. Most of us have one, it's expected. And in fact, it's a very, very important part of your identity, okay? If anyone tells me that I should sound more like an Australian or an Englishman, they're going to be in trouble because it's going to annoy me, right? So my solemn plea to you is don't try to reduce your accent, but do try to manage and train aspects of your pronunciation, intonation, stress, and rhythm, okay? Part of what we're going to do a little bit of today, actually. Fluency is about the speed of your speech, actually, and the flow. Now, there's two important points here. One is that it can be too slow and interrupted and disrupted. But that doesn't mean that pauses and ums and ahs are not natural. They're in fact incredibly natural. It's just when your talk is punctuated by too many of them, people can't understand because we speak in meaning units, okay? The other thing you can do, of course, is talk like this so that there's no gap between any of your words, and then people just really can't tell when one idea finishes and the next one begins, right? It's even hard for me to do, but those of you, or all of you, excuse me, with a second tongue, a mother tongue, sometimes that influences that, okay? Many of you, Arabic speakers to a lesser extent, Spanish speakers, Portuguese speakers, Japanese speakers a little bit as well. The rhythm of the language is quite different, okay? So sometimes naturally enough, you carry the rhythm of your first language over into English, and that can particularly impact your fluency, all right? It sounds, you think we speak fast, but sometimes it sounds like you are speaking fast with no gaps between sounds. But you know English is a very melodic, strange kind of la 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 language, okay? So awareness is what you need of these things, okay? Appropriateness is very, very important and easy to forget. Appropriateness is about your ability to use suitable professional language and explain things to patients in a simple way. It's also about your ability to communicate with patients of different ages and different backgrounds. Put simply, if you've never realized that we don't speak the same way to different people, depending on how old they are, who they are, their education, where they're from, their first language, their second language, all of these things, the room we're in. If you haven't realized that, realize it now because it's a massive part of OET. Now, I'm a pretty relaxed guy. You can tell that because I'm speaking to hundreds of people online without worrying about it too much. But you want to hear me speak to a nice old lady at the shops. Suddenly you'll be laughing, going, oh, Craig sounds so polite. Why? Because I like nice old ladies, you know, and we speak differently to them. They expect something different, right? The way we speak to children, we lower our tone and we speak softly. Why? Because we love children, most of us, yeah? Okay, so this is very, very important. A teenager expects you to speak differently than if you're speaking to a highly educated adult, all right? All of these things equal appropriateness. A highly technical explanation of a complex medical problem to a patient is nearly always inappropriate. Why? Because they simply don't have the knowledge to comprehend it. Okay, so please think about this. The most common version of appropriateness or inappropriateness, excuse me, would be when you use too much technical language from your field, okay? Think about it. If you're a physiotherapist, we all know there are muscles, we the patients, the public, we know there are muscles, but we don't know most of the names for the muscles, nor do we know how many we have or how they interact with our spine and our skeleton, okay? So you're gonna have to explain it in what we often call layman's or layperson's terms, okay? So that anyone of a general kind of education and intelligence can understand, okay? It's a very, very big part of making the patient a part or feel a part of the consultation as well, all right? There's nothing more isolating than technical knowledge and sitting there feeling like you can't understand what somebody's saying, okay? It brings people together when they understand as well. And then finally, grammar and expression. It's about your ability to use a range of grammatical structures and vocabulary correctly. Let me just qualify one thing. Spoken grammar and written grammar are not the same. We have the same names for structures, absolutely, okay? But the way we speak and the way we write and the expectations for these are really not the same, okay? So if you're thinking that your speaking is not enough like a beautiful, complex written sentence, you're being too hard on yourself, okay? Really, really, it's not the way it is. And you listen to anyone speak, practice with your colleagues, as a nurse said, and you'll feel it. You'll feel that speaking is short. It's often linked by very simple linkers like and, sounds. All right, so don't think that grammar means the same as complex written grammar, like you need to show in the writing. It doesn't. Most of the time, speaking is virtuous when it is simple and direct and clear, okay? Vocabulary is a little different though. You can show a range. You can use some technical words, obviously, because you might think it's appropriate. But at other times, what you're doing is saying, well, I don't think that I should use those technical words. So I'm now going to show my range by using other ways, by paraphrasing, by using synonyms, words that mean the same thing, okay? Medicine is full of these things, of course. All right. Now, the other thing, these are the new ones, okay? And they're very complex. Let me just check the chat, see how everyone's going. Oops, what have we got? Rupa, what have we got? We've got a question about, oh, Camille's got a question too. What if the patient is in ED and it says the cue card that she is anxious since she is having difficulty breathing? Do I still ask the patient what her problem is? I think if you're in ED, and the card tells you what her problem is, you might refer immediately to the problem, okay, and then try to deal with it. ED is a very emergent kind of situation, Camille, so you're probably not going to ask a person who's short of breath how they're feeling because it's probably obvious, right? So you might say something like, oh, I can see that you're really short of breath. So is it really bad? And you might ask about severity or something like that, okay? So you would respond quite naturally, okay? Or more naturally. Rupa's got a question about when you talk to your patients here in Sydney, usually we use words like mate, you know, Aussie slang. So what if I use this during my speaking test? I think be a little bit cautious, okay? Now I'm a pretty relaxed guy, but in some contexts, slang like mate and things like that can be considered unprofessional. So Rupa, I would err on the side of caution. If you feel as though the talk is going nicely and you've created a lovely rapport, you might consider dropping in some very natural language like that, but don't start that way, okay? Start in a very sort of semi-formal, polite way. Hello, Mr. So-and-so, how can I help you today? Oh, I can see you have an injury on your arm. Would you mind if I had a look at that? Okay, so, you know, keep it in that sort of more neutral area. That's the sort of thing I need to remind myself about all the time, because even more so than Australia, New Zealand English is extremely informal, okay? Yeah, Gyanu, if you speak too fast and you feel that you're speaking too fast, you just breathe, okay? Breathing does two things. It actually helps you, of course, get oxygen to your brain. I don't need to tell medical people about that, but it actually provides a natural pause. Okay, so breathe in a moment when there's a pause in your meaning units, okay? When you think one part of your talk, one part of your sentence, if you like, is broken, just go like that, okay? So I said broken, go like that. So remember to breathe, okay? It's a very, very typical part of performance too. Maybe when you were young, you might remember this. If you were ever asked to do public speaking, we actually have a natural, and this is cross-linguistic, by the way, there is quite a natural tendency to speed up a little bit, okay? So you might think you have 5 minutes of talk for your presentation, but you get it out in about 2 minutes, okay? But Gyanu, the trick here, my friend, is that you're aware of it, okay? No, you have to clarify that, my friend. I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Oh, now here is a critical question. Everybody in this lesson, whether you're on YouTube or here in Zoom with me, Noah's asked a or Noha, maybe, excuse me if I'm getting your name wrong, asked a very important question. Should I have to look to the examiner during the exam, or can I look to the card most of the time reading my notes? Anybody got an idea about that? Let's go back to this. Noha, I'm going to answer with a really obvious thing, okay? You remember here when we talked about real consultations, creating a good interpersonal relationship. If I never looked at you, if I said, oh, hi, how are OET guys? How are you? It's Craig here, okay? There's a couple of hundred of you out there and I'm just like, hey, hi, all of you. You know what? Oh, it's really great to have you here. What kind of relationship am I building with you? Basically none, okay? This is a speaking test. There is no language really. There are some contexts, but there is no language ever where you don't look at somebody when you speak to them, okay? All right, you simply have to look at them. You are in a conversation, Noah, okay? So you should read your notes very sparingly. So the way that you suggested here, it's the opposite, okay? You are keeping eye contact, you are having a conversation. Now there's another reason for that. First of all, it's very impolite, actually. And it's very hard to communicate if you can't see a person speaking to you. But the other thing I want you to think about, it's actually much easier to have a conversation if you are watching, hearing, and listening to the person in front of you. Okay, because you can just respond. Okay, so really, if you don't look at them and you read your card, you'll be doing two things. You'll be reading, which is not what you're asked to do. You're asked to speak. Okay, and they are not the same. Nobody ever said they were, and if somebody did tell you that, they were wrong. Okay, and also you'll be fundamentally not making a rapport, and you are tested on that. Okay, and you'll fail to create a relationship. No, Winston. We've only got the official samples, yeah? There's no such thing as open live tests yet. The test is only about 6 months old, not even 6 months old, actually. Okay, so let's have a quick look at these criteria, clinical criteria, which will help Noha think about this, okay? Relationship building, you're scored out of 3, Noha. If you don't look at a person in the eye, particularly in English, but actually interculturally, generally, you can't build a relationship, okay? What do they say in English? Shakespeare, stealing from the ancient poets, said the eyes are the mirror of the soul, okay? What he meant was that when you look at somebody in the eye, you actually get a greater understanding of them. It's how people connect, okay? So please use your natural communication skills, okay? Understanding and incorporating the patient's perspective. Again, if you're not looking at somebody, you're really probably not listening to them, and you're definitely not going to be able to do that, okay? Providing structure. This is probably the biggest challenge, and this is what the notes do provide you. They give you a sense of how you can move through the conversation, okay? And then finally, of course, information gathering and information giving, fundamentally asking questions and providing explanations, okay? Very much the bread and butter of medical communication, okay? All right, if you want to know more about the scoring, dear old Jay has put in a slide. This is a lovely screenshot of the E2 learning platform, if you like. Some of you know about this. Some of you guys on YouTube may not have ever seen it, but you can see lots and lots of lessons, but there's a couple of nice explainers, I guess you might call them, here about the linguistic criteria and the clinical communication criteria or communicative criteria. Just gives you more detail, okay? Gives you a sense of the concepts behind it, okay? Probably another advertisement, I guess, if you think about it. All right, so let's have a look at a role play, Winston. This is an official sample today. Actually, we're gonna look at a radiographer's one today. One of the reasons we can look at any card, because the method that Jay and I suggest here in E2 live class land is essentially the same no matter which profession you're in, okay, of the 12 that OET test. Let's have a little look at it. So what are we going to do? We get 3 minutes Okay, preparation time. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one of the official samples, all right? And I'm going to turn off my video in just a second, actually, because you don't need to see me waving around while you have a little think of it. But I'm going to time you with the 3 minutes. And along the, I guess you would call it the right-hand side, that you, as you're looking at it, of your screen, you'll see a little set of guiding questions, okay? And these are not the only questions you can ask, but they're the sorts of questions that I like to ask about the context so that you know who it is you're speaking to, where you are, and what you're speaking about, okay? So I'm just going to shut my video because, yeah, like I said, you don't need to see me. And I'm going to show you the cards, and I'm going to time you for 3 minutes, all right? And I want you to think about these questions as you read this card, okay? And then, of course, I will share my ideas with you. Feel free to put your ideas in the chat if you'd like, guys. Up to you. Oh, thunder and lightning. All right, my friends. So let's have a little look at your ideas. That's our 3 minutes. Well, good. Nice and simple questions. All right. So we've got in a hospital ward. Setting is absolutely critical. Okay. Because again, as professionals, you guys know we don't speak exactly the same way. Yeah. So in a hospital ward, the patient's in their late 30s. There's some suggestion of reassurance here, isn't there? We've got a back pain scenario, chronic back pain, actually, isn't it? Okay. Very good. Very good. So this is really an exercise in answering the fundamental questions, the obvious questions, shall we say. Okay. If you don't do this, you're far less likely to succeed in the task because you'll miss obvious aspects of the scenario. Yeah. Yeah, no gender yet. And that basically implies to you that the gender in this scenario is the gender of your interlocutor. Okay. Yeah, good, Hamza. So we see reassure, so we get a sense of it, right? So where is this consultation taking place? Well, it's in a hospital ward again. So, you know, professional language probably rules here, okay? So the radiographer speaking to a patient in their late 30s, again, thinking about appropriacy here. This person's an adult. They're probably reasonably well educated to some extent, so you don't want to be condescending. They have chronic back pain, so it's a serious ongoing problem. All right. What emotions are mentioned in the scenario? Well, there's some nervousness, yeah. Okay, we can just check that, all right? But we've sort of got this idea of reassurance, all right? So, I mean, you know, look, you could argue that it's not, but the word reassurance indicates that there's some things that need to be said to make the person feel better. They need an MRI, sorry. And of course, they've had other investigations. So this is a long-running problem. Now, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Now, a chronic problem, in layman's terms, again, my terms, is a problem that's ongoing, right? So you can kind of imagine you're speaking to a person here who's been to the hospital a lot, okay? And of course, they've had a lot of different investigations, whether it's x-rays, et cetera, et cetera. So that, again, should influence the way you speak to this person. It might actually be that they're nervous, but also maybe they're just sick of having to go to the hospital because they're in pain all the time and going through these procedures. So there's a lot you can understand from this, okay? All of these things are absolutely essential clues to it. The one thing that you do not know, of course, is what is on the interlocutor's card. And let me make that clear to you. The interlocutor has a card like yours that guides their performance and their speaking as well, okay? There is a strong connection between them, obviously, but you can never know, of course, exactly what it says. But noticing words like reassure and thinking, gee, maybe they just are nervous. Maybe they're frustrated as well, all right? And you're beginning to anticipate that in your planning time will help you be prepared and, of course, perform better when and if they do show any of these things. Not every scenario has emotions, though, okay? So don't get that idea either. Sometimes it's very neutral. Again, basically designed to be like, or as much as possible, like the real world, okay? All right, here's a little tip for you now. So apart from asking those sorts of questions about the context, there's another couple of pieces of information here that I want you to dwell on. And this really, I think, is the main purpose or the most useful purpose of these bullet points here, okay? So as you read the card, focus carefully on the key verbs to guide your planning for the task. These are called imperatives, okay? They tell you to do something, okay? And so they're telling you here that you must check the patient's identity, that you need to check that he or she knows why they're there, okay? And what it involves, and discuss any concerns, okay? So you've got to ask them questions about how they're feeling. Do they need to know anything? Is there anything they're worried about? And then reassure, okay? So these sort of imperative or guiding key verbs are the things that I would like you to focus on in the task, okay? Why? Because they also allow you, you notice, to show different language functions, okay? These are called functions, all right? Jay's taken the word function out, but when you use language to check, you are using that language to do something, okay? They're actions. So pay attention to these because they give you guidance on the sorts of language you can use, the sorts of language functions you can display or show, okay? The other thing I'd like to point out to you is that these bullet points, more than the content, they actually give you some guidance on how to organize your talk, okay? So it would be very natural to think after you've greeted the person and introduced yourself, etc., the basic stuff of pleasant, polite communication, to then say, oh, well, you know what? The first thing I'm going to do is just check that who the patient is, okay? So they actually give you a lovely sense of organization as well. Let me repeat though, even though this is a pretty brief set here, there is nothing in the OET rating criteria that says you have to do all of those things, okay? But they are central to achieving the task and they're central to providing what is a reasonably good and varied sample, okay? All right. Need to do a couple of tasks now. We've done enough talking about the task. And I want to just bring up one aspect of the communication skills. And this actually probably relates quite nicely to Noha's question about keeping eye contact rather than reading the card and things like that. And it's the idea of active listening. Okay, listening is not a passive activity. All right, you're taking in information so that you can respond and, for example, know when to speak. Okay. So what is active listening? Active listening is an important part of effective interactions, okay? Not just effective, but polite and successful interactions. Active listening involves more than just hearing what's being said, so that would be passive, okay? All right. Active listening is a skill which shows that you have both heard and are interested, most significantly, in what the patient is saying, okay? Nothing worse than feeling like somebody's not listening to you in any scenario, yeah? Some effective active listening techniques, one of which we're going to look at today, actually, include back channeling. This is a very, very interesting and very natural way. And again, another good example of the type of language you probably already have, actually. Back channeling, right? Saying things like, I see, okay? These little phrases and sounds which are not really, really lexical in the sense of having a dictionary definition, but they clearly have meaning, okay? So when I say, it tells you I'm listening, it tells you I understand. It actually also tells you, when I use that particular tone, that you should keep talking, okay? So it's an incredibly powerful little phrase, all right? If I go, it immediately tells the listener that I've heard them, but that I have a question, okay? If I go, it means, yeah, I heard you and I want you to keep talking, okay? So these things are incredibly powerful, incredibly useful. I've got a little activity to demonstrate that in a minute, actually. Showing empathy, okay? Showing that you understand the patient's situation or feelings. You can't really show empathy if you haven't heard, okay? It's really, really impossible because you've missed the emotion and the, if you like, the strain and the feeling inside the patient's talk, okay? So showing empathy is a very, very big part of active listening. Quite often, you will tell back the emotion to the patient, okay? In a later class, we'll talk about empathy. I'm not going to discuss it at length today. Using gestures, of course. Now, you're not assessed on your gestures, but again, another answer to the very good question about whether you should keep eye contact. Really, gestures are natural and they're extremely communicative. So even though you are assessed on a recording, if you're not using gestures and facial expressions, your communication is going to be extremely unnatural and probably quite unsuccessful, okay? Once again, everybody has their own gestures, these ones that you naturally use, that you feel comfortable using. Don't be afraid to use them, all right? It adds a note of reality, if you like, authenticity to your communication as well, okay? And then finally, mirroring or repeating part or all of what the patient has said, asking relevant questions, all right? Very, very common strategy. And again, if you think about this, you probably already do it. You might say something like, so you mentioned that you've been feeling quite ill recently. So can you tell me a little bit more about that illness? All right, and all I've done is said, you told me this. Can you tell me more about what you said, okay? And you can see that this is incorporating the patient into the talk as well as showing them that you were paying attention, okay? All right, my friends. So I'm going to play you a short audio. It's a real audio. It's a genuine doctor, a doctor of Indian origin, actually. And I just want you to listen, literally just listen, okay? And I want you to listen to the part of this consultation, and I want you to decide how well you think the doctor demonstrates each of these following active listening strategies. One means terribly, okay? It's not terrible, by the way. 5 means amazing, okay? Just realized that I just need to share my audio. So just excuse me for 1 second and go like that and share computer sound, the very, very typical thing that I always do. Okay. All right. So again, there's no wrong or right in this. I just want to raise your awareness of this task. Okay. And I want you to listen to this little sample and think about how you believe this doctor is showing or how well, excuse me, you think this doctor is showing the things that I've just talked about. What's going on there? I'll do it that way. What's happened to my audio?
I want to ask, which is a bit sensitive. Look, when people feel like that for a little while, sometimes they have thoughts about, I don't want to live anymore, or is it worth living anymore? Have you been having thoughts like that again?
Yeah, sometimes. I guess I have thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, right. And what sort of thoughts do you have?
I guess when I've had, stressful days or, not good days, I guess at the end I sometimes think about giving up.
And let me ask you straight, have you thought of actually doing something to yourself?
Not really, it's just been a thought.
It's just been a thought?
Yeah.
So you've thought about it but not acted on it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Do you find yourself doing that, or in the future?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm just tired and run down, and it's just a thought.
Yeah, okay. Look, how have you been coping with all this?
I guess I've been coping by myself, really. Yeah.
All right, give me your opinions, my friend. How did he do? Anything is acceptable here. This is subjective, yeah? Hamza, 4. So generally you think quite good, yeah? Esleen, you think not too bad, yeah? Absolutely, you can use okay and then Paul. Quite good, Mapesa, yeah? 1 to 4, Kira? Sure. Any 1s, 2 to 5? Okay. Good. So you're going, yeah, all right. So not too bad, yeah? So Rika, you're saying, or Richa, sorry if I've said it wrong, excuse me. But Gita, quite positive, yeah? Rika, you're saying 1, 2, and 4, and 5. So not so good on the empathy. Yeah, not an extended conversation. Quite an interesting, very realistic scenario for OET though, right? A gentleman unfortunately having slightly suicidal thoughts, yeah? Rexy says, excellent back channeling. I agree, Rexy. Rather lovely use of back channeling. Let's have a little closer look, shall we? I'll move on. I'll keep the chat open. So now I've got the transcript up here. So continue to contribute if you'd like. Okay, so I've got our little scale here, 1 meaning not so good, 5 meaning very good. Here we can listen again, and you can look a little bit at the language that he uses, okay, in terms of the text. It's quite a nice way to practice your listening, actually, guys, if you're ever feeling like it's challenging to understand, is to try to get the transcript and listen as well.
I want to ask, which is a bit sensitive. Look, when people feel like that for a little while, sometimes they have thoughts about, I don't want to live anymore, or is it worth living anymore? Have you been having thoughts like that again?
Yeah, sometimes. I guess I have thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, right. And what sort of thoughts do you have?
I guess when I've had, stressful days or, not good days, I guess at the end I sometimes think about giving up.
And let me ask you straight, have you thought of actually doing something to yourself?
Not really, it's just been a thought.
It's just been a thought?
Yeah.
So you've thought about it but not acted on it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Do you find yourself doing that, or in the future?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm just tired and run down, and it's just a thought.
Yeah, okay. Look, how have you been coping with all this?
I guess I've been coping by myself, really. Yeah.
Nice. So let's have a little look at it a bit more closely, yeah? Here's a nice example of empathy. I don't want to be too hard on him, and Noor's quite right that it's a relatively short example. But one of the things he does very, very well, which is a lovely strategy, if you find yourself in a context like this in your OET, or actually in your life, is he actually prefaces his question, yeah? So he says, I'm going to ask you some questions, and they're a little bit sensitive, okay? Now, in this context, that might seem obvious, but what that is a rhetorical move to say, hey, I understand you're feeling not so good, so I'm going to treat you with very, very soft, sensitive kind of language, okay? So we might call it a preface, right? He says, I'm going to ask a question, and it might be sensitive, but I don't want you to feel bad or embarrassed or offended or anything like that. Okay, and he begins to do it. So that's a nice strategy. Here he just kind of says, yes, I've heard you, right? And he affirms, okay? The other thing that I wonder what you think about is actually he uses tone rather well, okay? He's very, very soft, okay? And empathy is not linguistic, okay? Let me make that clear to you. Many people say, Craig, how can I show empathy? And they expect some kind of phrase or language. Now, we can use language to show empathy, but as a matter of fact, we just as often use our tone and our manner in terms of being soft and quiet and listening to actually show it, all right? So it's a function just as much of not speaking as speaking, okay? So the idea here would be, if we think about empathy, does the patient have a chance to talk about their feelings? This is only a minute long, as Anu has rightly pointed out. But I think if you look at this very, very short excerpt, this patient clearly has a couple of chances to very, very accurately and clearly express their feelings, okay? And that's a big part of empathy, being able to find the place where you can speak safely and not be judged, okay? All right, so again, I think you're overestimating what it is. Again, it's a short summary, but he's certainly not bad, okay? And I actually think empathy is the one that most people say that he's not showing. But to be honest, I think he is quite empathetic, actually. It's relatively straightforward. And you can see that there are some long terms by the patient, right? The patient actually gets to say, look, you know what? Yeah, look, I get stressed out. And so sometimes I feel a little bit like that, okay? So there's some little highlights, affirmation, just nice back channeling all the way through, okay? Mirroring, repeating. Okay, so you can see here's a lovely mirroring. Have you thought about actually doing something to yourself? It's just been a thought. It's just been a thought. Okay, Noah, a really nice example, Noah, of listening and the patient, the person you're speaking to, actually providing the language that you use. Isn't it peculiar to think that in a language test, you might actually use exactly the same phrase that somebody just said to you and demonstrate good language skills? Right? There's nothing fancy about that. What that is good, clear, precise, and kind communication, actually. Yeah? And again, a little bit of repetition. So not high language in the complex writing sense, okay? But really reasonably sensitive and sympathetic language in the communicative sense, okay? Lots of questions, obviously. This is clearly at the diagnostic kind of information gathering perspective, isn't it? The young man's obviously come in and said, I feel terrible, having these awful thoughts. And so the doctor, of course, sensitively has to get more information, right? It would be a disaster if this young man went away and the doctor wasn't wiser to how he was actually feeling, right? So he goes about it and he uses the general word thought. One assumes that's probably the patient's word, actually. All right, and you can see high repetition, thoughts, thoughts, thought, thought, thought. Again, not so bad, very, very effective in that respect. Lots of questions here, okay? And again, really, really nice in the sense of the OET criteria of information gathering, yeah? Keep going, lots of back channeling. There was lots of back channeling through this as well, and we can't put it into the script. It's not very easy, but there's a lot of meaning go on, you continue, okay? Particularly up here, all right? Where that's a reasonably long utterance from, or turn, as we might call it, from the patient, P for patient. And the doctor is really just going, keep going, you talk, okay? So not too bad, and actually I think somebody mentioned that they thought it was very good. And again, I like back channeling as a thought for you guys, because most of you now are thinking, gee, actually I have quite a lot of these strategies already, okay? If you don't, we can reflect on them and you can think about it, okay? Let's talk about back channeling quickly, guys, before I take your questions and concerns, yeah? Back channeling is very interesting, and in my field of applied linguistics and actually discourse analysis in general and linguistics is quite well studied, quite well, could be better, okay? But we sort of know quite a lot about how we do it, and we know it in relation to the choices and also the pronunciation or the sound, if you like, of it, okay? And here we often use falling and rising. It's a very common kind of technical terms in pronunciation as well, okay? I'm just gonna change my pointer. Get my cool laser. So continuers. Now, in that last sample we just listened to, we heard a lot of continuers, right? And continuers basically means the person who is etc., is telling the other person who they're speaking to keep speaking, okay? So it shows listening, but allows speaker to continue. Now you have to think about this as a doctor, nurse, medical professional, and think to yourself, gee, this is fundamental to your behavior. There are just times when, particularly at the beginning, when your patient has to speak more or a lot so that you get the information you need, okay? Most common ones here, again, if you use a different one, that's fine. Okay is quite a common one as well. Okay, and it's full rising, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute because it sounds weird, but when you hear it, you'll get it. Okay, acknowledgement tokens, yeah, is the most common. Yeah, oh yeah, 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 and it demonstrates agreement or comprehension. If we went back quickly to, oopsie, sorry. If I went back quickly to this, you would see it a lot. Yeah, yeah, exactly. The patient does it. The patient does it a lot. All right. But again, the doctor's like, yep, okay. I get it. Right? Nice one up here. Okay, so this doctor's got a very, very natural and pretty full repertoire. News markers, probably not so important for us, but this is when we actually go, right. Okay, it's kind of when we show surprise. All right, and we probably won't use it much in OET, but it's a very normal one in everyday speech. And then change of activity tokens. This, my friends, is going to be fundamental for you. If you think back to the clinical communication criteria, one of the things they are assessing you on is your organization, your management of the conversation. When you want to change the subject or move to the next stage, maybe you think you want to move to the next bullet point and go from asking questions to explaining, really, really simple to go, okay, all right. Okay, notice my tone. Both times, what that indicates to the listener is that Craig is about to speak and I'm going to change the subject, right? We're going to move on. All right, it's a very, very, very important thing. Teachers do it all the time. It's a super common thing in classrooms, of course, as well, because remember, teachers are organized and they want to move to different parts of the lesson, okay? So these two in particular, continuers and change of activities tokens, or change of subject, change of topic tokens are very, very important for OET. Okay, be very aware of this because the worst thing you can do is just use continuers and let the patient speak, or the interlocutor, sorry, in this case, speak too much. You need to let them speak, you need to hear them, but at some point, of course, you're going to have to move the conversation forward, right? Just like in a real consultation. At some point, you're going to stop asking questions and you're going to begin to give information, make suggestions and things like that, okay? Let's have a little look at a task. So back channeling facilitates communication. And the example we listened to just now is an excellent example of that, okay? And it creates a connection between the listener and the speaker. It tells the speaker that you are listening, actually. And it also sends messages like, I need to speak now. The intonation, that is the sound, the rising and falling of these back channels, is important as it can signal whether the speaker should continue or if the listener wants to speak. As I said, very significant. A falling tone, going down, usually indicates that we think the speaker has finished or that we want to take a turn in the conversation ourselves, all right? Both of those are really, really fundamental in life, but really, really for the short term, very significant for you guys doing OET. You want the patient to be able to speak, to incorporate their information and ideas, but of course you also want to control the talk and move the consultation along when you think it's necessary. Okay, a tone that falls, then rises again, usually shows interest and encourages the speaker to continue. Okay. All right. Let's do a last little activity before we finish for today, yeah? So I'm going to play you an audio. You can see it down here. And I want you just to listen to that audio, listen to the recording, and I want you to identify the intonation, that is the rising or the falling of the doctor's back channels. Okay, it's a different doctor this time. Remember that falling, going down, usually means it's my turn to speak now, and fall, rise, going down and then up, usually means please continue. All right, so I just want you to listen. I've segmented this conversation. You can see it here, so you'll get a few clues actually here, but just listen and try to be sensitive to the sound. And I just want you to decide, is the back channel here that you hear, is it telling the person who's speaking to keep speaking? Or is it saying that the doctor now wants to have a turn to speak? Okay, have a little listen and see what you think. And I'll show you my thoughts in a minute. Is it working? Oops, it's not being very kind today, is it? Whoopsie. Might be the easiest way to do it. What is going on there? Strange. Where's my arrow? Here we go.
Can you tell me about your family?
I'm married with 3 kids.
Okay.
They're 12, 15 and 19.
Mm-hmm.
The youngest 2 are still at school.
Right.
The eldest one has moved away to study.
I see. And your parents, any medical issues there?
My dad died in an accident when I was young, but Mum's pretty healthy.
Uh-huh.
Except for a bit of arthritis.
Hmm.
Let's keep going.
I've got 2 older brothers. One's diabetic and the other has high blood pressure.
Yeah.
He's got a really stressful job, so it's not surprising. I think he drinks too much, and his poor family never get to see him.
I see. And...
Oh, my younger sister has endometriosis.
Hmm.
She'd really like to have a family, so it's pretty tough.
Right.
We both used to get asthma as kids, but not now.
Okay.
All right, so it's quite subtle. So we'll have a little look. I'll show you my reflections and we'll listen back. We'll listen again, okay? So you can see most of them are continuing. You can see that's continuous in the script. But let's have a little listen with me providing the answers, yeah?
Can you tell me about your family?
I'm married with 3 kids.
Okay.
Okay.
They're 12, 15 and 19.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The youngest 2 are still at school.
Right.
The eldest one has moved away to study.
I see.
First time she wants to take over.
And your parents, any medical issues there?
My dad died in an accident when I was young, but Mum's pretty healthy.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. That's the classic full rise.
Except for a bit of arthritis.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Can actually become very fun, my friends.
I've got 2 older brothers. One's diabetic and the other has high blood pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got a really stressful job, so it's not surprising. I think he drinks too much, and his poor family never get to see him.
I see.
I see. I want to take over.
And
Oh, my younger sister has endometriosis.
Keep going.
She'd really like to have a family, so it's pretty tough.
right.
Right.
We both used to get asthma as kids, but not now.
Okay.
Okay. Classic discourse marker, that last one that says, I'm going to speak now. So the doctor said, that's enough from you. My turn to talk about what's wrong with you, or something like that. Very, very interesting example. This one here, I see, can you notice here in the script, she interrupts him, okay? He's just about, as patients do, or humans do, excuse me, the patient is just about to talk about all of his brother's problems. I think his brother drinks too much and he never gets to see his family and la, 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 la. She interrupts, okay? Then she says, now I want you to talk about something else. You're right, your younger sister. So it's an extremely powerful, powerful way to do it. She doesn't keep going though. She just really says to him, I don't want you to talk endlessly about the problems of your brother and his drinking and family. I want to get a general sense, all right? So she uses that one to take over and end his turn, but then she asks him to keep going with the question, and meaning, and anyone else in your family, not and tell me all about your brother's life, okay? Very, very nice. And she goes, I see. And she flattens it and it interrupts very effectively and still quite politely. The one here, okay, at the end is a clear marker that she's going to take over, okay? See, just like I did there. All right, let's have a look at the chat quickly, get your ideas. All right, so here's the point about this, yeah? The point is that most of you are probably already doing this to some extent, okay? All right, so the point is not to think, gee, I can't do this, but it is also to raise your consciousness and think, gee, am I sending the right tone message with these little phrases? Odds on, in many of your first languages, whichever they are, there's a little bit of a difference in the way that these kind of markers are used. You will probably have them. In fact, you do have them. They're relatively ubiquitous in language. They're just not the same, and they're not used exactly the same, all right? Obviously, things like okay and all right don't exist, but sounds exist, yeah? So it's about raising your consciousness. Yeah, it's very subtle. It's very, very subtle in there. And sometimes it's better to think about flat tones actually as well. All right. It's a very, very interesting one, but clearly she intends him to keep going, or at least to start out with another part of the description of his family. Yeah, I agree. No, absolutely, I agree. It's the hardest one. And often in real speech, not so many examples here broken up, it can be a little bit hard. But in the OET test, of course, you don't want to be in that situation where you feel it is. All right, Konstantinos has got a point. Let's have a little look at this. Konstantinos is making an interesting point. I think that since, this is what Konstantinos said, I think that since the most important thing is listening to everyday expressions and feeling how the speaking part would be treated by natives, wouldn't it be helpful if you, I assume you mean me or anybody, arrange with a colleague of yours to present to us this kind of communication, including all these elements, show us how it would be as an example? Yeah, look. It would be much more useful, Konstantin, interesting point, my friend, very subtle and interesting point. It would be much more useful if OET provided us with official samples of the speaking test, okay? The point is we can generalize and we can create what I might call a construct, okay? But we don't want to overgeneralize. There are, of course, numerous situations when we are speaking to non-native speakers, particularly if you're in the medical world, and obviously in my field as a teacher of people who speak multiple languages, okay? And of course, these things are not perfectly patterned, my friend. So when you talk about everyday expressions and feeling how a native speaker would speak, there's no perfect model for that, okay? It's a slightly old-fashioned idea, and I don't mean that as a criticism to you at all, my friend, because your point is very, very elegant and important. But the native speaker is not the target here, okay? the speaker of multiple languages, whether they're patients and or medical professionals, is the real target, okay? The native speaker sits in the background here, okay? But remember, the example that we heard before this last one was a highly, highly skilled second language speaker showing exactly the type of communicative use of English that is required in the OET test, okay? The fact that he's speaking to an Australian, a young Australian man who's feeling depressed is actually irrelevant, because really, if you think about it for just a second, in Australia, New Zealand, the UK especially, with sort of, you know, millions and millions of people from all around the world, you really don't know who or where your patients are going to come from, okay? So I think the real solution actually is for OET to get their act together and show us what a B or an A performance actually looks like, all right? And I've actually suggested that to them, and I got very little back, to be honest. But the other thing I want to say to you is that Jay and I have already talked about your idea, and it's quite likely that we'll produce some videos with a real OET rater stroke interlocutor, and then people like myself and Jay, and then other people being more like you guys actually to demonstrate it, okay? But there's no perfect model. That's the real thing I want to talk about, Konstantinos. And you can see already in these two examples, one a native speaker, one a non-native speaker, but highly proficient in English, that they're doing some of the same things, but they've also got their own repertoire. Yeah, but there's just too many ways to talk about it, my friend. So what the last thing I would want to do is present you with a model and have you think that that was the way that everybody was going to speak about these things. Okay. The what the interlocutors, let me tell you a little bit about the interlocutors while I just go to my first. What the interlocutors are actually asked to do is try to not be too colloquial. Okay. So they're not going to be using heavy idioms and really a lot of really informal language like we mentioned before, like "g'day mate" and stuff like that. They're going to be talking in a fairly neutral way, fairly, okay? It's hard to control, all right? So they're not going to be speaking like extremely like a New Zealander or an Australian or a person from Brighton or whatever, okay? Expressions really is the wrong way to think about it as well, my friend. In most cases, if you have a if you obviously have a technical diagnosis, for example, for a complaint, but it relates to a part of the body, then you really just need to think about that and go, well, okay, do I use the word abdomen or do I say stomach or do I say middle? All right, so there's infinite variety, not infinite variety, but massive flexibility in the way that we can do that, all right? But yeah, the real answer to your question is OET should show what it looks like, but also Jay and I have discussed something very similar to your idea, and when we have a chance, or when he has a chance more specifically, we will actually create some little live examples, yeah? But again, I want you to err on the side of caution and not imitate them, okay? Because they will just be singular examples, yeah? A couple of things I want to talk about. General strategies. Treat the role play as if you were with a real patient. Suspend your disbelief. Don't act like you're in an OET test and you're really nervous about your language. Act like you're speaking to a patient who's got chronic back pain and needs an MRI, okay? So really try to pretend. It's like when you're a child again. It's rather, if you think about it, that could possibly be fun. I know it probably isn't fun, but it could possibly be fun, right? This is one of the keys to it, because what it will actually do is you'll begin to activate and access your real language, the language you would really use should you actually find yourself in that real life context. If you sit there and you feel self-conscious and embarrassed because it's not a real context, you'll really be stopping yourself from flowing and communicating to the full extent, yeah? Alrighty. Allow time to establish a relationship with the patient and ask for relevant information. That's fundamental, and it's obviously also in many real life consultation situations, exactly what you would do. You try to make the person you're speaking with feel comfortable. You ask them relevant questions about how they're feeling and what they're talking about in terms of their health, okay? Remember that the assessor is testing your ability to communicate effectively with patients in English. They're not testing your medical knowledge. So the content If you're worried about the content, all of the information you really need is on the card, okay? The other thing is, many people say, can I add pieces of information from my own experience? Look, the answer is sort of, but be cautious. You really shouldn't need to. And if you worry about adding too much kind of exterior experiential knowledge, you may in fact just be making the whole thing too complicated, okay? As I said, OET assumes that if you need help with content, there's enough on the card for you to use, okay? Pay attention to the type of information you need to communicate to the patient and adjust the way you communicate this information. There we've got appropriateness, yeah? For different situations. If the patient's been given bad news, for example, you have to show empathy and kindness, just like you would in the real world. Okay, 2 out of 3. Don't memorize long answers. Anything the assessor believes, the assessor, not the interlocutor. Remember, they're different people. The assessor listens to the recording of your test later, after. Anything the assessor thinks has been memorized won't be assessed. OET has said that publicly and statedly. What we call rote memorization, or somebody writing a script like we just saw and trying to use that in the speaking test, will stand out really, really obviously, and they won't give you a score, all right? Or they won't score that part of the test, meaning your overall sample is significantly diminished in size, and consequently, almost certainly your score is diminished in size, okay? Not worth your while. It's a speaking test. Practice speaking, feel as confident as you can, get into the moment, and show the speaking you can do, the speaking you would do if you were really speaking to a patient. Use varied vocabulary which matches the needs of the patient and the context of the role play, okay? So variation is absolutely important as long as you're paying attention to who it is you're speaking to and what situation you're speaking to them in, okay? And you need to show that you can communicate with the patient in a variety of ways, okay? Obviously speak loudly and clearly and confidently so the interlocutor can hear you, okay? You don't have to quite speak as loudly as I do with my teacher's voice, but opening your mouth a little wider actually helps to enunciate sounds. It also helps to slow down just a little bit. Amongst this, I would say, remember to breathe as well, okay? It's quite common. You're in a slightly nervous, panicked state, and you might sort of forget to do obvious stuff like that, okay? Pronounce words as clearly and correctly as possible, and those two speak to each other. You know, if you feel like it's a difficult word, and you just slow it down ever so slightly, okay? If you're unsure about the pronunciation of a word that's on the card, that's what you should ask in the 2 to 3 minutes of planning time, okay? Ask the interlocutor how they say it, mimic it back to them, get it in your head, all right? Can't ask, of course, when you're in the role play. Vary your intonation, your voice should rise and fall, and we've just seen a lovely, simple example of that, okay? Read the role play carefully, as I've demonstrated at the beginning, so you do not misunderstand or miss out on any of the topic, okay? Or the guidance that's there. Underline your keywords and phrases on the card, so you can certainly mark the card in your planning time, your preparation time, okay? And it's a good idea. Don't underline too much, all right? Because then you don't really know what you're looking for. You're just looking at the whole thing, okay? To assist you with the role play, really good example would be putting a circle or a line underneath a key or useful piece of content that's provided there, all right? It might also be like what I do to highlight those verbs: explain, discuss, reassure. Make brief notes for each point on the card if you want to, okay? Some people do, some people don't. Include ideas and examples, but don't write full sentences, okay? That as soon as you write a sentence, you're going to be forced almost to read, okay? And remember, as I've already said, reading and speaking are not the same thing. Ask the interlocutor to clarify anything on the role play card which is unclear, okay? This can include the meaning or the pronunciation, as I've said, of vocabulary and the context of the role play. You cannot ask any questions once the role play begins, so please do it in your planning time. Don't be embarrassed. You're not going to be punished or marked down for that, okay? So please do that. And you don't try to do it in the role play. That'll just be wasting your own time, okay? Try not to be nervous, guys. You know, preparation and feeling like you've practiced strategies and you've done as much prep as you can is a big part of controlling nerves. Some nerves are normal, as I said. Take a deep breath, smile, make eye contact. Yeah, no, Noha, remember? As you begin your speaking test, while eye contact is not assessed, it can help you feel more confident, and it's also fundamental to communication. And a couple of important things before we take a little bit of questioning. You do not have to complete all the tasks, all right? You are not assessed. And if you look at the OET public descriptors, nowhere does it say the candidate completed every bullet point on the task card, okay? So you have to give a sample, all right? And using the bullet points to guide you will help you give a varied sample, but it's not a requirement of the task. Make choices, yeah? This is a big one. This is why I started with the quote from the medical communication expert. You need to decide, how do I do that? How would I normally do that? What's an effective way to make that particular linguistic move in this context I'm given on the card? Consider who you're speaking to and how that affects your language choices, yeah? Balance speaking and listening, and we discussed active listening, okay? It's a massive, massive part. They're really part and parcel of the same thing, okay? Respond to what the patient says. Another reason to have eye contact and to actually be listening is because sometimes you don't need to decide what to say. The patient will say something and you will just naturally go, so you say you've got a sore knee. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Okay. If you're not actively listening, you're never going to be able to respond to it, and you lose opportunities to just generate language through actually having something very close to a real conversation. Okay. All righty. And then Jay's little message. Have you taken a one-to-one speaking tutorial yet? All righty, my friends. My excellent friends out there in YouTube land, I'm going to disconnect you now, all right, because that is the end. It's been really lovely to have you, and best of luck to all of you whenever you're doing the test. I hope to see you again. Okay. I'm going to open the chat. I'm actually going to stop the share. All right. For now. Whoops. Sorry, stop share. Oh, what happened? There we go. And I'm going to turn my video back on. All right, and I'm going to end the stream. Lovely to see you all, YouTubers. Take care. Keep OETing. Don't give up. Your dreams are awesome, and hope to see you again in one of these